My name is Berit Ås. I'm a social scientist, a feminist activist and peace organizer. I have also been a politician. I was the first women party leader in Norway in 1973. I've been an MP. I've been a delegate to the UN, a member of Norwegian Committee of Foreign Affairs and Financial Affairs, and I am 86 years old. Today is the 31st of May in the year of 2014. And what I think I'm most well known for about in 30-40 countries in the world, among women especially, that is a theory about the 5 master suppression techniques. Sometimes it's only labeled the suppression techniques. Sometimes it is labeled a little more correctly the male 5 master suppression techniques. And that is really what it is about. It is about how patriarchy or how men are able in some way to use mechanisms to avoid women to get into power. I think it is an interesting theory because it is embedded both in political science, in sociology, in linguistics, and in psychology. If I start, and it's 5 of them which I put forward. In fact, it is 7, but I only use the 5 because I call them the social master suppression techniques. The 2 others, which I don't theorize very much about, is 2 very, very strong techniques, and that is from Simone de Beauvoir, the objectification of women. You know, women are sold and bought and looked upon as property. And it is also violence, because that is body language. Women are victims of violence all around the world, in peace and in war. But let me start with this relationship to political science. Sometimes you can very simply say that power comes in 3 forms. You have power if you get your will through. You have another, perhaps stronger kind of power if you are able to get your will through against other people's will. Then you are in a kind of conflict situation, but you're winning. And it is a 3rd form. And that is that the power is when you know the techniques and the methods through which you can get your will through against other people's will. So one can say that this is thinking about taking power on 3 different levels. And in fact, I think my theory belongs to the 3rd level. That is to be acquainted with what kind of methods really you either can develop yourself, that's very difficult, but the methods that the dominant group is using against an undergroup. And that is why I also feel that if you don't understand, if you can't really understand, and you can't see, and you can't really analyze the methods by which you are suppressed, it's very hard to find countermeasures. So this theory of mine, I think I started to look for some kind of understanding, while women, in spite of their cleverness, their knowledge, their courage, still are almost unable to win. And if sometimes they get their will through, something happens that takes it away. But mostly the rewards that women get for doing something that other men have been doing is also much less. So if we keep to this kind of political science, we could say, where is it that power, both on the local level, in the family, in the classroom, in political life, in economy, in the global financial kind of world, where is it really most eminent? Where is it most striking? And to me, that is in the institution of politics. If you are a politician, it means very much of you to catch power, to gain power. And then in the next phase, it is very important to keep that power. And still more important, it is to increase that power. So that is an inherent dynamics, very much visible in the institution of politics. I use, of course, the word institution in a more sociological way. It is not a building. Very often the layman or the laywoman think that it is the parliament itself that is the institution, or an asylum. That's not it. An institution, in the meaning of sociology, is rules, bylaws, which are guiding the behavior within a certain part of society. Business, church, school. And these rules and regulations are very often written up in laws. And we call that institution for the formal institution. But then we are inventing another label, and that is the informal institutions. And that is embedded in the habits, in the way we always have behaved. And sometimes the formal institutions, or the formal rules, like equality between the sexes, for instance, they are not strong enough to really cope with the informal institutions, this kind of habits, and those who are embedded in religious attitudes and so on. So the master suppression techniques is very much about this informal institution. And this theory about the 5 master techniques, suppression techniques, it's mostly a theory about body language. That might be a little difficult to understand because we have such a weak language. We have so few terms that really can describe immediately to us what body language signal really means. But let's look at those master suppression techniques, and in fact master suppression techniques, that's not a new word in Norway. We had a man who was both a philosopher, and he was also deeply embedded in psychoanalysis. He was one of the pupils of Freud, but he deviated a little from Freud because he said that power might be as influential in people's coping with their life than sexuality. And he especially was concerned about weaker people, handicapped men, for instance. He said they very often compensate by taking power. And he said, look around in the world and see who are the really dangerous kind of despots. You'll find they are small men. Napoleon, Hitler, Mussolini, you know. They're compensating. And in some way he also said that about handicapped people. Sometimes you'll find that they're compensating for their lack of either strength or status or beauty or what it is. This man, Ingjald Nissen, was a very important man in Norway. And he was the first that got a state stipend in Norway. And he used this suppression technique in one of his first big books about George Moore's moral philosophy. He wrote a book about master suppression techniques and the ethics of morally ethics. It's a very, very interesting book. But he used that word hersketeknikk, which is the word in Norwegian. Later, he also used that term because he was writing a book about psychopaths. And he said that when it comes to the diagnosis of psychopaths, it seems that it's almost is impossible to cure them because they have this kind of ability of putting guilt on every person without themselves adjusting to the laws of the democracy. They are demanding for themselves that people are treating them according to all kind of moral rules, but they themselves are then only putting very much guilt on other people, so that this guilt feeling makes people obey. It's a very interesting book, and he then relates this kind of master suppression technique to a sick person, and it becomes then a kind of mechanism which are used by a group of almost psychiatric persons on other persons in the society. Very influential. So here you have an input from philosophy. Quite much later in the 70s, I had a mentor, and she also wrote about herskemoral, about master suppression techniques. But she was making it more general. She was saying that it is some of these formal and informal power mechanisms that the masters, those who are in power, can always use towards those who are powerless. And that she used that for understanding the feudal Europe and in a series of other conditions, but she made it a social mechanism. And while I was reading this, I felt that the way those mechanisms were used, quite often in face-to-face, they were different when they were used from men towards women, or, for instance, men towards men. That was the first kind of distinction that came to me. And later I have seen that women cannot use the same master suppression techniques that the men are using on them back on men. One of them is to make another one invisible. The second master suppression technique is to ridicule. But if women do this to men, they are bitches. They are selfish. They are not nice women. But men has ways in which they both privately and publicly are accepted when they just forget what women has done. They don't write about them. They are only concerned about themselves. It's a kind of a self-interest of me and my brother in all those kind of heroes that we have appeared through the history. And they forget women. Or women aren't really part of the game. So this ways that the master suppression techniques have been written about is within some kind of analysis, sickness, and the other is a society kind of mechanism. But since in the 60s, when I started to be a researcher and a little of a philosopher, and through the 70s, what came up was internationally this kind of liberation of women. And it is within that frame of reference that I started exactly to think, what kind of mechanisms is it that keeps women down, both in private life and in institutions? And that was the kind of starting of the whole thing. I have been criticized because I am genderizing the master suppression techniques. I know that this has come up in Sweden in a book. And I said, of course that's what I do, because it is not similarity. When men are suppressing women and women are suppressing men, if it's very asymmetrical. And it's very different from the way men are in some way taking power over other men. It's a big amount of violence, open violence in that. And one of the worst things you can say about a man is that he is a woman. I mean, he is, what do you call them? The old women, bitches. Or that a man is homosexual. That is what you really hit men with. Or that he is weak, like that he's sissy. That was they use in military training. If a boy isn't really courageous and strong enough, they say he's sissy. Yeah. And of course it goes the other way around. So when they talked about Golda Meir, the Prime Minister of Israel, they said that she was the only man in her government. And that was also said by Thatcher, that she was really the real man, the male in the government. And then that was praising. But if you said about a male politician that he was really sissy or woman-like, weak, especially if he was called an old woman, that was not any honor connected with that. So deep in our souls, there are already, during the names we use, some discrimination which stems from old age. Remember, we didn't get the soul until the church meeting in Nicaea in 325. When should we get political personalities? It took many hundred years. And from there on, and to think that we sometimes would have a value and personality traits which had some access to power and power over other people. It's a long road to travel. But anyhow, when all these thoughts came up, I started to search for could I observe? Could I see? Could I really have my eyes open to how men in face-to-face situation, boys, male students against female students, boys in grammar school towards small girls, have they behaved so that women develop this kind of self-understanding that I'm not very self-reliant, I might be dumb, oh, I can't really cope, oh, I shouldn't talk this way, or perhaps I behaved in the wrong way since they don't listen to me. All these self-characteristics, where did it come from? And then, fortunately, I was elected into a political party. And the choice of party isn't so important because I have a friend who was the leader of the Liberals, and she said, what is happening to women and to me in my party is that I am made invisible, but you are ridiculed, Berit. So we are under some kind of male power, but it takes a little different form. So I started to ride upwards in that Labour Party, and it really ended up in such a way that I became the vice mayor in my community, and I was among those 4 who were sitting in front of the local kind of branch of the party. This has nothing to do with that it was a Labour Party. This happened in all parties. But while I was going around talking with people individually, very often they said, oh, that's a good idea. Oh, we will support you. But when that was taken up in the locality, I had this fantastic, mysterious kind of experience that they didn't listen to me anymore. When I spoke the same thing that they said they would support in private, suddenly they were looking out of their glasses, or they looked at books, they started to talk with each other, and when the case came up for voting, I didn't win. I had a very good friend from the union at that time, and he said, can't you use your psychological insight? He really didn't say that. He said, can't you use your union? But there is some kind of language trouble here. So I thought he meant that I could fetch my kind of understanding from my profession. So I was teaching methodology at that time, and I think, what can I use to understand? Why I have so little influence and power in the group, while they agree so much when I talk with them individually. And then I remembered that when I taught psychologists to, for instance, look at the family scene or a treatment session or something, I told them to really take the chair back and look at the parents and the child or the different parties in the negotiation, and to be sure that they tried to identify in which kind of behavior the power established itself. So he helped me, and I took then, when I proposed something, I took my chair after a while and I withdrew about 60 centimeters. So while I then talked, I discovered that the male member of this leadership group on my right side, he had so many funny ways of expressing his opinion of me. He could do like this. He could turn away from me and whisper to the person on this side and listen to him, whisper again, listen to him, and had this conversation going. So, and while I was putting forward my proposal, he yawned. He was so tremendously tired. Sometimes he really was so tired that he stretched his arm up. In addition to this, he could fetch up a book or a paper, put it up in front of himself and read while I was talking. And not only that, he could put that paper or book down in front of himself, take up a pen, start underlining, putting the book back again when I was through. He had also some very funny ways of doing this kind of face. I don't know what to do. So it looks so funny that if people really were looking at the two of us, they would be concerned about his way of doing all this. And sometimes he just rose up, and then he did this on his trousers, and you thought, for heaven's sake, what is he doing? Is it some kind of massage? No, he was just finding out if he had some coins, because if he had some coins, he could raise up and he could walk to the end of the room and buy himself some beer or some kind of juice, and on the way down he would do something like this, stop and talk to people, and then he would be back again at the moment when I had finished my talk. He didn't say anything. It was no words involved. But it was so obvious from the way he behaved, his language, his body language, that he couldn't care less about what I said. And of course, when it came to voting, I lost. I think I used between 3 and 4 months of those meetings observing these different kinds of body language. Then I went home and I made all these kind of behaviors myself in front of the mirror. And then I proposed something, and in the proposal I had a series of lines. So I knew that this fellow, an academician, would do all these things. He would disagree with me. He would disagree with me. But while he was disagreeing and was giving his speech, I did all these things to him that he previously had done to me. But I tried to, in some way, uncover it in some kind of more feminist behavior, you know. And all this. And to my big surprise, at that meeting, a colleague of my friend here stood up. He was a doctor, by the way. He was a gynecologist who really had everybody in his hands, I must say. But anyhow, he said, I don't understand this. Hans Hansen, I labeled him Hans Hansen in my theories. I don't understand what's going on. Usually you are right, but today I think Berit Ås is right. And since he was a kind of forefront of a meaning, all the others started to say, yes, we think that Berit is right in this case. And in fact, we think the Prime Minister said something like this. You know, let's support her proposal. And while I had been performing, I have felt so badly. I sat there and I said, somebody must raise up and say that you can't be that unpolite, Berit Ås. I mean, I had a feeling that I was really behaving completely unacceptable, and that I was so surprised that there was no people who rose and arrested my kind of bad behavior. And then I said, after a while I thought, and I learned that very much later, that if I hadn't been an academician and a professor, I think I would have been arrested. If I had been a cleaning woman, or if I had a tremendous low status, or an immigrant or something. But I had some position already. So this was clearly a male and female on the same status level. But still on that level, he had this very natural way of behaving, which told me that I was badly informed, I wasn't good. And as this continued, I tried to look at how were the other women in this group treated. And very often I saw the same thing. The women might want to take the floor, and the male leadership didn't see them. They may take the floor and then get some kind of verbal response in addition, saying, oh, you're so sweet when you're angry. And so I had this feeling that there wasn't so many women in the political group in the end of the 60s, but I really had the feeling that they were also treated in a way that men would not treat other men. And but while I was looking at him, I thought, what should I really label those body signals? And after 4 months I found that to be made invisible was a very, very well-founded affair. You know, people didn't look at the woman when they took the floor. They started to talk with each other, or they started to check their calendars, or sometimes they looked in the paper. I have very nice men, feminist men, who today say, Berit, you don't have to talk more about master suppression techniques, because we know now that we shall not read papers when women talk. And I said, but do you know that you should listen to them too? So the thing is, it has many levels. Very often we experienced with the local press that if women had been taken the floor in the community council, they were not reported on, while the men's kind of claims and proposals were taking tremendous place. And in sports, in soccer, it was 8 pages. And also, when they didn't win, it was big analysis. If a woman won, we had one called Grete Waitz who won a series of marathons. And the first time she won was in a German town, and it was on the 6th page, and it said, "Then the mayor embraced her." And so the thing was that when women in some way were taking prizes and so on, it was more a little notice. So this making women invisible, you can find it in every paper, and if they are made invisible, they are often made visible because of their body beauty, or because they are doing caring for others, while men are leaders of military actions, or soccer, or driving cars, or jumping very far on skis. Also, if you look at the number of pages that are given to those male heroes in male areas, they completely overshadow the few women who are in those similar kind of activities. But anyhow, making invisible, that is, I also talked with a very, very important women physician who was a member of the ILO in Geneva. She was very concerned about laborers' rights. And when she heard me teach about making invisible, she said, "I have experienced this all the time. You know, when the men are talking about labor and unions and labor rights and so on, I'm sitting there and I made a big report about how those labor rights doesn't really help women very much. And when this talk starts and a kind of a lecture is given, I have my arm up. But the thing is, I never get the floor first. It is as if this leader up there, he looks at the people and he says, perhaps it is a woman who is completely crazy around there. So he picks up 2 or 3 men previous to I get the floor. I had a conversation once with her in a bigger group of both men and women, and I said, because she said, sometimes I put my arm up immediately. And then I said, but do you know what you are going to say? Do you know what kind of problem you want to take up? And she said, oh no. Oh, how do you dare then? I said. And here I was the one with the master suppression techniques. And she said, you see, if I got the floor first, I would walk slowly up where I'm standing, looking at the total group, and I would say, I withdraw. And the reason is that then they have seen me. And then they will whisper among themselves, who is that woman? Oh, you know, that is the Norwegian who has given in this big report. I have been seen. So I know exactly that is what I would do, and I wouldn't be scared at all about doing this, because they have seen me. And the moment she said that, I thought of all the community council meetings, where a case can be debated and debated and debated and debated, and everybody knows who is for and who is against, but everyone is running up, taking the floor, because then they will be in the paper or on the TV show. So they are seen. And when women in Norway, in my community, took the majority, we said, you know, now we are going to be effective. And the administration, they said, it was marvelous, because in some way we got things through, and we didn't have to listen to all this kind of small differences in opinion and to move a comma and to send it back to us, to have it edit in another way. This was the most effective 4 years we had in the community camps, because women, they solved the problems. So to make invisible, that is one thing, but the second thing is, of course, to ridicule. And it's absolutely fantastic to which extent women are ridiculed. And while in some way women were working for the suffrage, it was pictures of them with big kind of behinds and with funny hats. And in fact, these women who thought they were men, you know, it was the media was showing how hopeless they looked. And of course they were older ladies. And we had one lady with an umbrella. And that was Aunt Ulrike with her umbrella. What she really did to really propose the suffrage and to organize women and so on, that was completely overshadowed. I experienced some of the same thing when women started to drive cars. That was such a funny thing, that you saw those women who bumped into cars and who stopped at corners and waved to each other, stopped in front of shops looking at pictures. You know, in these first motor papers and articles, women who drove the car was so dumb. And of course we had that when women started to be secretaries too. They couldn't, in Norway, they was really doubted that they could use a machine. So whenever women break through with such new knowledge, to keep them back is to ridicule. And I have just exactly these days, I have a new experience, because I've been ridiculed. I have worked against tobacco firms here in making laws against smoking. I was the only woman in a group called a group for smoking, against smoking and for health. And while there were 6-7 men in this group, very important men, I was the one who was pictured as a crazy woman. You know, she is almost hysterical about health. Doesn't she know that this mayor, he makes 80 per day? Doesn't she know this? And she is a psychologist, and we should tell children in school that smoking is dangerous. And she wants then to make those women get scared because of their fathers and mothers, and especially the fathers smoking. Do we really think that this is good for the education, to scare kids to that extent? You know, there were hundreds of different kinds of ridiculing. And now these days I am a person who really are very skeptical to what you call chemtrail. Not contrails, which is what old jet airplanes from the military left after them sometimes. That was just water clouds. But for many, many years now, we have had other kinds of stripes all over the world, going completely across and along the ordinary corridors. And a friend of mine and I, we have taken water down in rain after this, and found that it's very heavy of barium. And I went through this research from about 1996, and all around the world there are conferences, there are researchers who saying, what for heaven's sake are they spraying on us? But to in some way mention this in Norway. Norway is a little, very provincial country. You are, of course, a conspiration theorist. This never existed. It was nothing dangerous with these kind of stripes, which you call chemtrails, which is chemical trails. All over the world, they wonder. The European Parliament says, we want to know. A parliament in Cyprus says, we want to know. Researchers in America says, we want to know. We are very scared. We think that something is dropping down us. It's not only geoengineering, which is good for the climate to really keep the sunshine away or something. It has some other kind of effects, deep health effects. So all over the world they are discussing this. And you find this kind of stripes not only over the Western world, but in the South Pacific. I was in Shanghai, I saw them there. Whenever I go in different places of the world these days, they are everywhere. But I'm a hysterical woman. And the other woman with whom I work, who's very, very methodological, she is the one who took down the water sample and had it analyzed and found it was 200 times as much barium in that one that was allowed in Norway. She and I, in some way we decided that to make this issue is discussed in Norway, we have to play this role of two older women who are in doubt. And we have just been on a TV program and pointed to very much of the research and so on. But we have been ridiculed, you know. These old ladies, perhaps they are a little tired of embroidering or licking on these kind of candies. Perhaps they are on the edge of being psychiatric cases. That's what we get in report on the email. So older women are always a little crazy. I mean, Agatha Christie must be the only example who in some way contradict this, but she's only one. All the others, we are either nice knitting ladies or we are crazy if in some way they think that we know something. So this ridiculing is something we experience all the time. And of course it's very, very usual to say, oh, you know, your proposal, that in some way in that party group of mine, they didn't write it down when a woman, for instance, proposed something about traffic security. But when a man took it up, then it became an important kind of report in the protocol. And he was asked to put up a committee to make the community council look serious at this kind of problem. And I said, but you know, Mrs. So-and-so, she took that up about 20 minutes ago. Why isn't she invited into this group? She has had observations of kids on the way to school. It's a very dangerous. My community, our community, is one of the worst in the Norwegian set of communities. Why don't you listen to her? She said it first. Oh, did she? Did I say? They didn't listen to her. But anyhow, let's look at the third master suppression techniques, and that is not being informed. Also, holding information back. We know that from international politics. I mean, we have a person called Snowden these days. But this has happened all the time. It is accepted to lie in politics. And we have a slogan in Norway that lying is accepted in love and politics, in war, in love and war, war and love. But that goes on all the time. But the thing is that withholding information might have the same kind of effect as not telling. So in this, to keep on looking at my observations, I very often saw that men in some way came out from the toilet and they looked a little funny. They looked at each other and in some way I had some experience from my own family. I have 3 boys, and when they really plan to do something bad, they also go on the toilet. And when they came out, they look exactly like those community council men. So you could read their body language. And it is exactly in this kind of Woodhouse books, a butler or a servant knows more about the master than the master knows about himself. This way of behaving is in some way telling you that something is really going on which you shouldn't really know anything about. So we tested this out, and we were so right over and over again. These 3 things are very easy to see in body language. And the thing is that this body language thing is very effective because it makes women feel uncomfortable without really knowing why they feel so uncomfortable. So to raise that kind of feelings, to intellectualize, as Freud said, to make it conscious, so they in this way could handle the situation by say, oh, this is master suppression number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, and they started to speak this language to each other. And there are 2 more master suppression techniques which I might go further and tell you about, and the one is not mine. It is established by an American sociologist called Robert Merton, and he called it damn if you do and damn if you don't. And you can be punished both if you do a thing and if you don't do a thing. And that comes from the fact that what women do have different adjectives than men's. And if you looked to the describing words of their behavior, the thing was that they always have negative connotation and have a kind of a punishment thing. And finally you have the guilt feeling and the shame feeling. And that is deep, deep rooted in the culture, because it comes from religion. So women in the Muslim world, they have all the shame. Women in the Christian world have all the guilt. We should never have given Adam that kind of apple. But these are, in a way, big boxes around the 3 first master suppression techniques. And it can be said very much about it. But the thing is that very often people are not so aware that the same kind of behavior is given different kind of description and connotation, and that in some way also, if women and men talk in the same way, show emotion in the same way, that give the people an opportunity to give them different personalities And then the women's personalities, they are filled up of emotion, of loss of logic. Men are rational, they are objective. We have a whole line of adjectives which are in some way fed into us through literature, through media, through the politics. So to make only women aware of those 5 master suppression techniques, it's very important that they are not too linked to language, but to body language. And I say, let's make 5 of them, because in a group of men and women, if women are started to be treated in such a way, it has therapeutic effects, because they always think it's wrong, something wrong with themselves. But here I teach them, you are not dumb. It is something that makes you dumb. And that is why you have to really reassure yourself all the time. This is not me. It is something that comes from the outside. And we know from social psychology research of groups that when men are successful, they say, oh, this is something that I really master. If a woman really has success, she said, oh, wasn't I lucky? And if men have fiascos, they said, it's something out there. It wasn't my behavior. It was something that really made it because of something in the situation or in the environment. But women are taught to say, did I do something wrong? And this then has to do with this guilt and shame attribution, which we learn from we are very, very small. I have a feeling that we could talk about this very, very much more. And the thing is that I think I've been to between 30 and 40 countries, from Brasilia, Japan, China. In fact, this little pamphlet was made in Chinese. This pamphlet has been given now out in at least 25 languages: Spanish, English, Japanese, Chinese, Tibetan. And wherever it goes, it is sold out. And it cost almost nothing. So I'll ask you to scan this into, but it can also be found on Norwegian email in very many different languages. So the thing is, women, they say, come and tell us. And perhaps the most touching thing I've experienced was a woman in a Swedish town called Luleå. I had been there 3 times. And when I was there 4th time, I saw the same lady on the first row. And then I said, I've talked to you 3 times before, why are you here? And she said, I must listen to you again, because it was through listening to you I found out that I was not guilty.